Welcome back to Pillow Talk Sessions. I'm Kristian Lupinski, joined as always by my co-host, Jessica Gillingham.
Thank you, Kristian. And today on the podcast, we're joined by Mayank Pokharna, who is the CEO of Flat.com, which operates co-living buildings across the US. And he's also the founder of Everything Coliving. He's a true pioneer shaping the co-living ecosystem through operations, tech, and community building.
We'll also dive into his journey from operator to tech innovator, explore the rise of flex living, and unpack what global co-living operators can learn from the shifting rentals and evolving regulations.
Plus, we're going to have a conversation about the balance between hospitality and community, and also how cultural nuances plays a role in building scalable, meaningful resident experiences. Mayank, thank you so much for coming on the Pillow Talk Sessions podcast. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say, because you have so much experience in co-living and also sort of across so many different geographies as well. So welcome.
Thanks a lot, Jessica, for having me here at Pillow Talk. I've been listening to Pillow Talk for quite a while, and I think it's going to be an amazing conversation today.
Brilliant, thank you. And before we sort of kick into the conversation, would you like to give us a little bit of background about yourself and what you're doing as well?
Okay, so I can talk about what I've been doing for an hour, but I'll try to keep it in like 3 lines. So I've been in the co-living industry for the last 10 years. I've been an operator, a tech service provider, a consultant, an advisor, uh, and I've worn different hats across different geographies, helping co-living businesses become more and more sustainable. That is what I've been doing. As of today, I run a company called Flat.com as a CEO in US, and I run a platform for co-living founders to help them build sustainable co-living businesses, which is everythingcoliving.com. So that's what I've been doing.
Oh, that's great. And I think, this will kind of really influence a lot of what we're talking about today. So I think we should just jump straight in and maybe we can discuss your background a little bit deeper. As you mentioned, you started in co-living operations with Simply Guest in 2015, moved into property management, tech and development. And now you're leading, as you mentioned, everythingcoliving.com, as a central platform for the industry. I think to start, maybe you can tell us some key lessons you learned from that journey, across operations, technology, and development, and how those are shaping the way you're curating and guiding the co-living conversation today.
All right, so let's break that down into kind of 3 parts. When I started in co-living, I didn't know anything. Like I was not from a real estate background. I was fresh out of college. I was doing my first job and I was looking for a place to stay. And I couldn't find a community where I could kind of feel myself. And that was the start of something where I stumbled upon two brothers who were doing shared living. It was co-living was not a known word, very well known word back in 2015, and then they gave me a place to stay, and I ended up joining them as a co-founder later. But that's how my journey into the co-living ecosystem started. It was out of my own experience and trying to find something that had a right balance of affordability as well as community. Now, through my journey, wearing different hats since 2015, uh, like the first 6 years were about operating Simply Gas, scaling it to about 500 units, 17 different locations in a single city of Bangalore, and we were covering about five six pin codes and 17 locations. One of the biggest learning that I've had while uh, being on like building and operating these co-living spaces was that you need to fix the basics first. Co-living is all about community and like you can create a brand, you can talk about multiple things. But if you don't fix the basics first, and if you don't give the end user the basics that they want, everything will fall out of place eventually. And that's the reason for a lot of downfalls of co-living companies like Quarters and Common, and they didn't stick to their basics. And that's what I tell everybody, that you have to stick to your basics. You have to make sure that you are doing things right. Uh, so that was one of the biggest learning throughout that. I also did that mistake during first couple of years where I focused more on the community and branding rather than fixing the basic operations, making sure that people are getting what they're promised. And I tell this about this to everybody, that this has been one of my biggest learning. Other learning is a little bit technical, but overspending on marketing. That's something that I've seen a lot of co-living spaces doing. Again, I did the same. I burnt my hands in the first couple of years, 2015 to 17, burned few $1,000s because we were bootstrapped, so it hurt a lot more. And that is something that I ask people not to do. There are always a lot of ways in order to connect with right target segment, join the existing communities, go to form B2B partnerships. There are a lot of non-monetary way to get your first 100 customers, and you should not spend even a single rupee to get your first 100 customers, because if you are, then either you're not hustling hard enough, or you are not using the existing resources to their full potential. So that was another big learning through my journey of Simply Guest. The third thing that I would tell, and the last thing that I would tell, is know your unit economics, right? Like that's the biggest thing that can be a reason for success or failure. Because if you know your unit economics and numbers well, you will make good business decisions. We took certain bad calls and had to burn our hands and lose a lot of money. But then that made us realize that if we don't know our numbers at back of our hand, then we probably should not be doing this business, right? So those are the three big learnings from my journey at SimplyGuest. Then when COVID happened and I moved on to developing the software, so we took all those learnings along with our operational learnings and started something called Jumbo Tiger. So Jumbo Tiger was a property management software specifically built for co-living. We worked on it for 20 months. Here, I got to explore the world. I got to explore the overall, uh, like 15 different regions. So we had a live launch. About 126 people from 17 countries joined us, and 50 people signed up for our beta. Now, having access to so much of people was a blessing in disguise because it was COVID. Everybody was at home, everybody was joining these calls, and it became really easy to get people on those calls, which was very difficult before COVID time to get people on call, let alone build something in one part of the world and sell it in another part of the world. So that was another very big learning for me, that people were ready to talk to you. And when we showcased our product, people got very excited. Uh, Now, the way the what I learned in a very interesting way was co-living is divided into like six major regions. So there's North America, there's South America, then there is European region, there is Middle East, there is Southeast Asia, and there is South Asia, right? So that's the whole spectrum, and every segment or every region has their own specific understanding of co-living. So there's no standard universal definition of co-living. It's very region specific. I'll just give you one example and then I'll move on so that the listeners can get the context of what I'm trying to say. Is that if you look at it from a perspective of what works in India, India it's all about affordability, lowering the cost by sharing the same space with multiple people. They care less about community. Like very few people, like top 2% will care about community, but 98% will care about affordability. But when you go to US, it's different. It's a combination of affordability as well as community that people value. So you have to work on both ends. So the product that is called co-living is very different in US versus what works in India, right? So similarly, in European, it's a lot more experience driven. It's a lot more digital nomad focused. If you go to UK, it's more house with multiple occupants. It's an industry which has like what 10 million rooms right now across UK uh, under HMOs, right? And it has been a matured industry in as a shared living in ecosystem in UK. So different regions value different things. Different regions have different kind of approach to co-living, and that is what I learned when I was building the product, which is what people should understand. People with global ambitions of starting their co-living and going global need to understand that it's not one size fits all. There is no standard definition. You have to understand the culture of the local region and then see what works and what they value and then evolve the product accordingly. So a person running co-living company in Berlin or in Paris or in Lisbon, if they come to India and start their own, like the same brand, they probably would not be successful if they don't understand the cultural and the regional context enough. So that was another big learning. And since then, since 2020, 21, I've worked with more than 50 different co-living brands across technology, helping them choose right technology, helping them in their marketing, scaling their marketing in an organic way, um, with lower spends, and then customer service and community, right? So across those kind of work, one of the biggest learning for me has been that uh, when to use the right technology, when to spend, right? The If you spend too early, you lose. If you spend too late, you again lose, right? So finding the right time to invest in technology, understanding what's the need of technology, and technology is an enabler and not a solution. What people in co-living world eventually ended up thinking, since 2017 to 21, there was a funding frenzy across the world happening in co-living. It was all happening on tech valuations around the perception and the story of, oh, it's a tech that will solve this for real estate. But ultimately, real estate is a space business. It's a people business. It's not a technology business. And people need to understand that technology is an enabler, it's not a solution. So that was another one of my biggest learning. So yeah, that spanning last 10 years, I can go on and on, but I think these are the few things that I value a lot more, and I keep talking about them on different forums and keep talking to people to not reinvent the wheel and make the same mistakes again. Learn from what mistakes we did, others did, and then build on them.
Brilliant. You basically gave us a lesson for any business. So the things to kind of watch out for is you've got to know the money. You know, you've got to really understand your finances. You've got to really understand your customers and what their needs are and what they, you know, what their problems are. You know, really understand your customers. You've got to get the basics right before the bells and whistles. And then marketing, you know, not to go crazy on marketing, but making sure that you're using it as an amplifier rather than as a sort of the initial route in. And so, you know, any business can do with looking at those things. You know, it's really important to look at those things. And I just want to reflect on something else you said, which is in the co-living community, you know, co-living brands were kind of positioning themselves as prop tech brands, and it kind of, and getting all that valuation because they were sort of going forwards as prop tech brands. We've seen that in other sectors as well. So in short-term rentals, we had a lot of that. Operators calling themselves tech brands when actually they're hospitality and real estate brands. And so, you know, that's a sort of reflection on that as well, that so be wary of what is actually a space business isn't a technology business. So that's really interesting. But what I'd love to talk to you about, Mayank, is that you have worked with 50 different brands across all these geographies and all these different parts in the world. And you talked about the cultural nuances, the well, not even nuances, like huge cultural differences. And I guess co-living in a way probably really emphasizes those because it is where we live as well. Like it's a sort of a core fundamental need of humanity is to have a place to live as well. So those kind of differences kind of go on all kinds of levels, not just for money, but also psychology, social as well. So you know all of those aspects of how it kind of impacts. But how do you work across all those different regions with those big differences? And how do you help operators balance those? So if any of the brands and operators that you work with, are they in quite different localities? Because even, you know, Portugal compared to UK is very different. Germany compared to France might be very different. So how do you sort of balance all of that?
Right. So it all again. First of all, thanks for asking that question. I think that's one thing that it's nobody has asked me this, so I think it got me thinking while you were talking about it. But uh, it all started like my approach to helping people in different parts of the world. Like I never looked at it as different parts of the world. Like when I started, I didn't know that these cultural uh, uh, kind of differences had so much impact on the business, and you had to change the way you would look at product or build the product, given you are in different regions. So I had some failures in my kitty. I had some failed projects where I couldn't help co-living founders, and I had my share of learnings, right? So in 2020, 21, when I worked with first few projects, I was trying to replicate what I did at Simply Guest, and it worked really well. And we grew from like we in about 1 year. See, just to give you a context, in India, the average rent is about $150 per month. US dollars. And with that, we reached $1 million in revenue over a year in about 2.5 years' time. So a lot of things worked well for us. And what I was trying to do once we closed Simply Guest was to take those learnings and go run with those learnings and help other brands kind of fast track that. But when I started using the exact same things, what I realized was very few things were working. So it was a lot of experimentation that I had to go in for me to understand why it was happening. So when I tell you this right now, it may look a very trivial thing. It may look a very commonsensical thing that, hey, yes, cultural differences are there, and so it should be a different product. But back then, I didn't know that. So when I had first few failures, I went on the drawing board and then I started talking to people. That's when, so before even starting my own podcast, Everything Co-Living, I had done more than 400 conversations. So this is not me working with people. This is me just talking to different stakeholders in the co-living ecosystem around the world. So I literally have records of those 400 conversations. I have a book where I've recorded my learnings from all those 400 conversations. And then I kind of bifurcated them based on geography, based on type of businesses, based on the target market. So I kind of filtered down that into a booklet for myself, which became a manual for me to work. And those conversations, and I had conversations with service providers, I had conversations with existing student housing operators, co-living operators, digital nomad co-living operators, destination co-living operators, within different regions, software providers, different service providers, which are like let's say a laundro, like a Wi-Fi providing company, a laundry solutions providing company, uh, the property management software companies, co-living softwares, tenant management softwares. And when I spoke to these different stakeholders of people, that gave me an understanding that the way they were speaking had a lot of different approach to where they were coming from and who they were solving it from. And that's how over the period of last 4 or 5 years, having those 400 conversations, and while I was having this conversation, one of the persons said, hey, you're anyway having these conversations and they're so useful. Why don't you start recording them and putting them out on YouTube? Even if you put them raw, people will find them so useful. And that's how my journey of podcasting started. But that was the process which gave me enough depth in different regions to understand and work with the brands to help them build uh, kind of sustainable co-living products which could work for them. So that is the kind of, so there's no shortcut to it. If you are a co-living company in a specific region and you want to start there, my suggestion to you would be in that region, identify top 30 people and just reach out to them on LinkedIn. People are really helpful. We just are scared to reach out to people thinking that they will say no. All I did was just went ahead and I just messaged them, hey, I'm looking forward to a conversation, 30 minutes. I can even, if you want me to pay for that conversation, I'm happy to give you $100 vouchers. Nobody took the voucher. I offered $100 voucher to all the 400 conversations that I had over the period of last 5 years. Not even one person took that. But I just wanted to be respectful of people's time. And that's what I did. And that's what helped me understand this better. And that's how I started uh, kind of figuring out that what works in which region. And that is how I started working with these different brands. Hopefully that answers the question. But if you have anything specific, I'd love to answer that.
Yeah, I think I do want to touch a little bit further on that kind of cultural and demographic differences. You know, you mentioned like in India, people are looking for more of affordable area versus European is more of community or experience. I guess, you know, for these brands that are international, you know, how can they manage consistency in the brand and service standards, but also, you know, while they're, you know, localizing, you know, for these vastly different markets?
So, interestingly, when you say this, you look at what Habit has done. Habit has expanded across the globe. But if you go and stay in a habit in a Singapore, and if you go in a sit in a habit in Berlin or let's say Lisbon, you will have a totally different experience. And I was staying in a habit earlier this year. For a month, I was in Singapore. I was staying in a habit, and it was a very different experience than other co-living spaces that within habit that I've stayed in. So there is again no one size fits all. You need to understand the cultural context, the societal context, and the end user requirement, like having drilled down your target persona very well to develop a product. You can still have a brand, right? Like Habit is still a one single consistent brand, and they solve for one thing. They provide you uh, flexible housing at different parts of the world. You can call it co-living, you can call it shared living, you can call it flex living. Different people like to name it differently, but ultimately they are helping you find the right place for you along with the right community of people to live with. Right. So that core proposition, so any brand who wants to grow globally needs to have their core proposition sorted out. So your core proposition doesn't change different, it doesn't change at all across any geographies. What change is your service delivery. What changes how you deliver that service and how you structure that service. That changes. For an example, if habit comes to India today, it is not in India yet because India is a volume game. India, because the rents are much lower. You need to have much higher numbers and much complex operations in order to succeed. But just for the sake of hypothetically, if habit was in India, they can go two ways. Either they can go and attract top 1% of the market, which is easier for them to have a very premium co-living. In India, top 1% market is around of organized sector. So only 4% of sector is organized, and out of that 4%, 1% is premium segment. But the population is huge, so that number also becomes very huge. So either they can come and solve it for premium customers and great pick up their experience a book from Europe and bring it here in India and solve it for only top 1%. Or if they want to have a larger footprint, they can come here, understand the market, and adapt their product to then reflect the rents locally, reflects you can still bring some elements of your learnings from other regions, which can be a differentiator in this region, which may not necessarily be a differentiator in other region. But if you bring that with having that differentiator, the way people will adopt you will be a lot better and the way you will grow will be much faster, but you still need to understand the local context. And that's why if you see companies like Habit, they do have local partners in every new region that they go in. So they go with those local partners, have a conversation, they do joint ventures so that they don't fall behind on the local context. So it's very important to have that. So for global brands, that becomes absolutely important. If you look at what Cove is doing, Cove has now expanded. They were a Singaporean co-living operator, then they expanded in Indonesia. Now they've expanded in Japan and South Korea, and then they have all done all of that with joint ventures. So it's very important to have that local context and understanding of the market for you to be successful in this space.
That's interesting because I think that goes across quite a few markets, doesn't it? In hospitality, it's having, whether it's maybe franchise partners that are on the ground that understand the nuances and the differences in local markets, or other types of living sectors where you can't just go in and say I'm going to take over Singapore, or I'm going to take over Thailand, or I'm going to take over Berlin. You have to really understand those markets, are having those local partners. I just want to say something, and I don't know if you will see any similarities in it at all, but I'd quite like to get your thoughts actually on a brand that is in the hospitality space out of India, Oyo, which has done very well within India, coming in and sort of taking over, a sector within India, and then going outside as well. And even though this is a slightly change of subject here, I'd just love to get your thoughts on Oyo if you have any.
Oh, yes. Oyo was one of our competitors back then. They also did venture into co-living for some time, and then they realized that long-term stays probably is not something that they enjoy too much. So they went back to what they do best, which is hospitality and short-term stays, hotel stays, and mid-term stays now. I love Ritesh Agarwal. I love what the brand that is built. I love the operational rigor with which he has worked. I know his initial story where he started, how he started with that one building. I've listened to it many times as an inspiration for myself when I was starting my own operations. So I think 100% credit goes to operational rigor, right? And at some point, they also did position themselves as a technology company, but then they rolled back later and then they realized that they're not a technology company, they're still a real estate company. And then they changed their approach to the market, which, and then the way they selected right markets to expand, whether it was vacation rental in Europe with some acquisition, with Motel 6 acquisition in US. So they did again those strategic acquisitions within the different regions were the key to success because they got a lot of local context and understanding of the market from there, and then they used what rigor uh, that they developed and learned in the Indian market, because the Indian markets are the most uh, chaotic market in the world. If consider any sector, they are the most chaotic market. You will find the most amount of edge cases within the Indian market, and with if you come from that market, if you become successful in that market, that's a testament that there is always less chaos in other markets. So it's easier to get successful in other markets. But having said that, if you ride on the success in Indian market and try to replicate that in US or Europe, you probably wouldn't have been successful. And then having those inorganic strategic acquisitions that OYO did in Europe in terms of vacation rentals and in US, I think are the key to their growth and key to the sustainable growth that them now showed over the last few quarters. So, but I definitely respect the brand, and I definitely respect, like, they have their own shortcomings. It's not that they are perfect. They had their own learning curves. You will always find 5% people complaining about every other brand in the world, whether it's Gucci or Chanel or even Oyo or Marriott. But that's how the user is, right? Like you will always find somebody who is not happy with somebody. I just want to give you one again insight into this is something again I just realized is that in hospitality, the number of failure points are always very high. Things that can go wrong are always very high than things that go right. So it's always what can I do to make sure that I minimize my failures, and if it's not about you maximizing your success points, but it's about minimizing your failure points. That's how I see hospitality. Whether it's co-living, whether it's short-term rentals, whether it's Airbnb, it's all about minimizing those failure points. And the more systematic, the more technology enabled you become, the more process driven you become, the more operational rigor you have, you minimize those failure points and more successful you'll be. It's irrespective of co-living or hospitality, this stands true. So while we were talking about it, I think OYO has done it significantly well in order to grow to the level it has grown.
It's so interesting, and I guess it's like you said in the beginning. It's get the basics right, get the foundations right, and then all will follow. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. It is, really interesting to get your views on Oyo as well. And I was very lucky to see him speaking at Skift India in Delhi last year, and he is an incredibly impressive young man
Yep.
as well.
I love his energy. And I think there's a lot to learn from him, which all of the hospitality and the co-living entrepreneurs should definitely take few of those things that he always speaks about.
We have a few more topics that we need to cover today, so I want to move on to the next one, which you mentioned briefly about flex living. So I thought we'd talk a bit about that, especially during our discovery call. You mentioned how it's on the rise. From your viewpoint, what's driving this shift away from these long-term rentals, and how do you see it influencing the future of co-living and hospitality on top of that?
Okay, so we need to look at a little bit of like take a step back and look at the larger trends that are happening around the world, right? Since COVID, the percentage of remote workers have drastically increased. When I say remote, it's not that it's hybrid workers, like people who have access to working few months remotely. Now, the number they may even have to go to office like 5 days a month, but then they can gather those, like go to 1 month and then have a conversation with the manager and say that, hey, next 3 months I'm traveling, so I'll work from there. And most of the companies would agree with that. Uh, with that shift in the fundamental way how people look at work, the pool of people who are now open to traveling for longer periods have increased. When I say longer, longer than earlier, if you would go and visit, you will have a 7 day or a 10 day trip at the most, but now you would want to have, let's say, a 1 month trip, and you won't mind having that 1 month trip. Now, that's one behavior change and demography change that's happening around the world. Second is people value experiences a lot more than they were valuing it 10 years back. In combination of this, the 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 kids, right, in most of the parts of the world, people are having kids a bit later, a couple of years later than they would earlier have them. If they were earlier having them at 27, 28, now they're having them at 30. Average, I'm talking about in general. Delaying of having kids gives you more freedom for those couple of years to travel. Work giving you freedom to now having extended travels, period of travels, and then disposable income increasing because for the 2 years people didn't had anywhere to spend, so they saved a lot more, so they have a lot more corpus to spend. Now all of this points to people going out more, exploring a lot diverse geographies, trying to see as much as they can before they start planning their family, right? And that's driving a 18 to 34-year age bracket into a lot more longer term stays. Now, if I have to go and stay for 1 month, hotels are expensive. I would not want to stay in a hotel. Now, what I would look for, ideally, co-living is becoming a default choice for that, where I would want to stay for a month and then move on. And that's why flex living is on live. So so flex living and co-living they are two separate concepts. People think that they're competitors to each other. Co-living is an asset class. It's evolving as an asset class. uh, Flex living is a concept. A co-living can have flex living or cannot have flex living depending on how they are developing their product. But these are the few mega trends which are happening around the world on a broader level, which is fueling the flex living market because people are now traveling for few weeks to few months, a lot more than they were doing pre 2020. And that is what is fueling the whole flex living ecosystem.
It's really interesting looking at it in that the co-living is the asset class, but the flex living in a way is the service. Is you said the concept, but I guess we could also say the service provision is that the resident, the guest, whoever can come and stay for a short period, a month, 3 days, a month, or longer, looking at it like that. And I hadn't really looked at it like that before. I have a question, and there's clearly been a growth in demand for flex because many of us remote work or have the ability to remote work. Yesterday, I live in the UK. Yesterday, I was in France and I was co-working in a co-working place in France yesterday for the day. Amazing. And within the vicinity of where I was in Bordeaux. I looked on my Google to look for a co-working place. Within a 5-minute walk, there were 3 co-working places that I could just trip up for the day, get a desk, all of those. So there's obviously demand for it because of the way, work has changed since COVID, expectations have changed, there's a more transient kind of population. There's been a lot of brands coming into the space to offer flexible living. Are we at a point, and do you see a point coming up where there might be a saturation between the supply of flex living accommodation to the demand? Like, is there a point where there is a saturation?
Okay, let me ask you a counter question. Do you think we have enough hotels in the world?
That's a really good question because when you book one, they're all bloody expensive. When and I often, if I'm going to London, I think, God, how many hotel rooms must there be in London? Why are they still all over £200 a night or whatever? So, I mean, they're much more than that as well. But yeah, that's a really good point.
So it's the same thing, right? Like with ever increasing demand, what I've seen happening from my vantage point, from working in a co-living sector, is that a lot more people are now, a lot more hotels are now changing their infrastructures. The new hotels that are coming up are changing their infrastructure to have community at the core, are changing their infrastructure to have longer term stays, to support longer term stays. A lot more people are having, a lot more hotels are having kitchenettes in their rooms rather than just having the room, a smaller room to just stay, right? So those, I see those changes happening because a lot of brands are trying to diversify their risks post 2020. What if there was a business hotel and I had to stay for, like, let's say in a business hotel for 3 weeks? It's very difficult to stay in a small room for 3 weeks. You always run out and you feel different, right? You don't feel right, you don't feel happy staying in a business hotel. But now imagine if that same hotel have a little bit larger space, a kitchenette, like in an open balcony, the way you would love to stay in there for 3 weeks, right? So that approach, Airbnb had a big role to play in it, because while all of this was happening, the short-term rentals and the Airbnb market was opening up different products to the world, which were way better in terms of experience than an hotel. So now hotels had to adapt. So I don't think there's a saturation in foreseeable future, at least in my lifetime, which I see. This is gonna continue to grow. We are becoming, like, a lot of things that are happening in the world right now says that, okay, we are moving towards deglobalization, we are moving towards more nationalistic things. But the way I see it, we are moving towards a one world equation in, like, let's say 50 years or a 100-year timeline, because we will have world without borders. Like, I truly believe that in about 100 years time, because there'll be no other way to survive. And when that happens, again, this is for foreseeable future, at least in my lifetime, I don't see any demand saturation coming in, because there's always the demand, there's always the need. And even now, if you look at average occupancies of co-living, average occupancies of co-living, according to my latest report that I published and the latest survey that I did, where 250 operators took part, was about 91%. So if all the co-livings are still at 91%, there's always a demand. If it was 70%, I would be worried that, okay, no, there's a saturation in the market, but there's not, right? So that's how I look at it.
It's interesting you talked about Airbnb, because Airbnb is sort of moving away from its core of offering real estate, a space to stay, to all sorts of different services and experiences now. So in a way, they're not pivoting away, but they're certainly encompassing a lot
Adding.
more, adding a lot more than just that real estate piece.
No, so you have to. I would just like to add one thing on that Airbnb piece, right? Airbnb has not been able to lobby in most big cities of the world in order to uh, kind of convince local governments that what it is doing helps ease the, like, the pressure on the existing infrastructure. Sooner or later, co-living is going to be in the same place, because it's a little bit of an evolved version of what Airbnb was, and it's going to have to go through the same struggle that Airbnb is going through. But I think we'll be better placed because the time will be right in terms of getting the co-living the approvals it needs from the government and the organizations from around the world. And the reason co-living has to right now, sorry, Airbnb has to right now go towards experiences is to expand its offering, because they at some point are seeing saturation in terms of hosts. So now they have to go to experiences in order to expand the basket and justify their valuations of what they are, right? But that doesn't reflect, or that doesn't in no way say that the co-living market or the flex living market at some point is starting to saturate. Like, we extremely need more housing. There's a housing crisis in UK. There's a housing crisis in US. You can see that. You can read the news daily, right? So there's a report by Pew Trust in US on how, like, if we open up our existing stock, so it's not a housing crisis problem. It's more of the type of products we are developing and pushing in the market. If you're pushing single family homes in market, rather if you push co-livings in market, you will be able to house, like, you will be able to fix the houselessness and housing crisis in probably 10 years. But the kind of product we're pushing in market is still single family and multi-family houses, which is where the problem is. The problem is not availability of the housing stock. It's the type of availability of housing stock that is available.
And is that because of the affordability?
No, affordability is one segment of it, right? But we as humans are also evolving. If you take US example, for the longest time, for the last century, they have been a very individualistic society. Look at what American dream was, having your own home, having a car, and that was an American dream for the longest time. Like it was not community, it was not living with people. And if you look at the 2023 study of loneliness crisis, like loneliness epidemic, which was done in Europe, you see how as a humankind we are becoming. So my grandfather had 11 siblings, my father had five, I have two, I probably will have a single kid. So see how the families are growing smaller. In most of the cases, they are going smaller. Now, with when families are growing smaller, you don't have enough interactions with your existing families. You have to go out and talk to other people. You have to make friends. That's another demographic shifts that's happening, which is fueling the community living as whole. It can take different products. It can take co-housing, co-living. It can be it can take different shapes and size, but at the core of it, it's the communal living that is coming back into the equation, and people are craving for it.
I'm going to let Kristian. I just have to say something here because it's how families are getting smaller and moving away. And I was going to say, except for Elon Musk's, who with his like 12, 15 children, having them all on a compound, it's like co-living,
Yeah,
lux.
I don't think we're going to have a lot of Elon Musk around. I think he's taken the only Elon Musk spot that there is. But I do want to, our final topic of today kind of leads into what you were just talking about was, this idea of community. And I want to talk about the balance of hospitality and community, as co-living is often described as a blend between hospitality and residential living. From your perspective, what's the right balance between cost-efficient operations and creating meaningful community-driven experiences for residents?
See, that's a very big misconception that community comes with a cost. It doesn't. And it comes with a shared vision. It comes with a approach. It comes with your thought, with a common goal. I'll give you a few examples. So I invested in a co-living company for digital nomads in India. It's called Nomad Gaon. I visited Casa Mia co-living recently in Singapore. Both these co-living, so one is for digital nomad, one is for young professionals. So Casa Mia co-living is for young professionals in Singapore. Now, they probably spend like 0.5% of their overall revenue on the community initiatives, but they have built the best community there is from a co-living perspective within Singapore. They created rituals, they created shared vision, they created platforms or kind of rituals which could help people meet and connect. They have morning walks, they have evening walks, they have food hawker center food walks, they have a first Friday, they have a first Monday. Now, these are the rituals which were created. Only few of them are paid by the co-living company in order to initially push people, but rest of it, people take care of it themselves, right? So it's you need to understand that you need to give a right structure, and that's where most of the brands lose, right? They think doing events is a it's a it's a community building exercise, and that's all community building is, right? For most of the brands, doing events is a community building, but that's not. You need to initially figure out what your brand is. You need to make your brand ethos, have a shared vision that, hey, this is what we're developing, this is who it is for, and this is what we're trying to develop. Now, you can always argue that, Mayank, if we go too much into community, we start curating people very hard and it starts affecting our unit economics. We will have always occupancies if we don't find right people. So I always tell that it's an iterative process. Initially, you make your business work, get try and get people as close to your shared vision and target persona as possible. But even if you're not getting, you welcome other people. Show them what you are trying to build. Most of the people will have positive response to it, right? And then slowly there will be culling that will be happening. People will keep leaving when they are coming, and then you can have more and more curation as you go ahead, right? So that is how every brand needs to look at it. You don't have to start from day one. You don't have to start having uh, uh, kind of, how do I say this, like a perfect community from day one. It's an iterative process that you have to go through, and it's not a cost center. I have the data from I spoke to the founders of Everything Co-Living, and Eugenio sorry, I spoke to the founder of Casa Mia Co-Living, and Eugenio, the founder of Casa Mia Co-Living, gave me a very specific insight that since they started and ramped up their community building initiatives, their costs have probably gone up, like gone up by 0.5%. But the average length of stay increased from about 9 months to 13 months. Now, in that period, they didn't do anything else. Like they just kept doing better. They kept bettering themselves in terms of community building initiatives, and they kept curating people slowly in a much better way to have a better community, and that had an impact. So, if done right, community is a enabler for you to have higher lifetime customer value, lower customer acquisition cost, because likes attract likes, and if you create a like-minded group of people, it will attract a like-minded group of people. And even if it attracts a person who is not like-minded and they feel welcome, they will adapt to that group, right? So that's how community grows, and that's how you have to develop it. You have to use technology as an enabler as you grow, to continuously build technology in the right way. So it's not a cost, it's a it's the way you build it. It, for me, co-living community in co-living is a revenue center. It's not a cost center. It requires some investment, but so does building a co-living business. You have to look at it that way. So the mindset and the approach to community building uh, needs to change with co-living as an industry on the whole.
So a very clear ROI. But I have a question. Is there any conflict between building community and scale?
Yes,
Like what are the challenges there?
the moment you start scaling, if you okay, if you start with too small a community like vision, if you start with say that, hey, I will have this kind of people, initially when you're small, you can attract those kind of people. For example, let's take fitness co-living. Like let's say a co-living only attracts fitness enthusiasts, and their whole day is planned accordingly. The whole infrastructure of the co-living is planned around fitness. Everything is around fitness, whether it's food, whether it's workouts. Now, when you are small, you have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 units, you can still attract. But imagine a fitness co-living going to 500 units. You will not find at the same time 500 different fitness enthusiasts wanting to stay in a co-living. So if you start with too small a target market in order to build community, you start having issues at scale. So for smaller brands, it is okay to be niche, focus on specific theme, and then build community around that. But as you start growing, you need to become broader. And that's where for most of the brands are not able to take that dilution and handle that properly. You need to have a very strategic approach to changing your community characteristics from one to another. But if you don't handle that correctly, the brand dilution happens. People start feeling disconnected with the brand, that hey, it's not the same as what it was, and then it starts affecting your numbers, right? So if you are to know that next year I will grow from 50 units to 300 units, you need to slowly start changing the characteristics of your community a year before, and have a slow transition, so that as you start growing, your community feels welcoming to that, rather than they feeling, oh, now something wrong has happened.
No, that's brilliant, and I think that's a good place to end today's conversation. Mayank, really interesting. I think we can keep talking and talking because there's so much different topics that we can probably get out of you. But if people are interested in finding out more about what you're doing, maybe you can tell us a little bit about Everything Co-Living and where people can go.
Right. So Everything Co-Living is a platform for advisory training. We run a small agency within Everything Co-Living, helping co-living brands in their marketing, media, PR. We also have a co-living course, which is now right now about 26 people are part of it, where which will help you build a sustainable co-living business. So that's all we do at Everything Co-Living. And the learnings that I gained from running Flat, which is in 9 cities in US. It has about 1,300 units that we are managing. So I'm implementing whatever. So it's like practice what you preach. So while I keep working with different co-living founders at Everything Co-Living, I'm also implementing the things that I'm preaching at Flat, and gaining experience from there, gaining practical challenges that we generate in real business time environment, and bringing those learnings in and implementing them at Everything Co-Living to help people prepare better, understand the domain better, have more sustainable businesses. So that's what we're doing. So if you can find me on LinkedIn, you can find me on everythingcoliving.com. You can always schedule a call directly from there. would be happy to have a conversation.
Brilliant. I have absolutely loved this conversation. I've learnt so much. You are a fountain of knowledge about co-living and also hospitality as well. A vast amount of information you have and insight. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Jessica. Thanks for having me here. And I also loved the conversation. This conversation was probably a very different one than I generally have, because we touched upon so many different tangents. So thanks a lot for inviting me.
And that wraps it up for us today. So thank you guys so much for joining us on this episode of Pillow Talk Sessions. To stay connected and catch every new episode, do us a favor and head over to pillowtalksessions.com to subscribe. And be sure to follow us on LinkedIn for more insights and interviews with leaders who are shaping the future of hospitality, multifamily living, and community-driven spaces. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Pillow Talk Sessions.